Investor Brand Network, IBN, a multifaceted communications organization engaged in connecting public companies to the investment community, is pleased to announce the launch of the Stock2Me podcast as part of its sustained audio communications effort to provide specialized content distribution via widespread syndication channels. The following Stock2Me podcast is an Investor Brand Network audio production and may feature a client partner of IBN. Investor Brand Network may have been compensated for the production of this podcast. Please be sure to read our entire disclaimer for full disclosure. Thank you, and here today is your host of the Stock2Me podcast.
Welcome one, welcome all to another online business briefing where we shine a spotlight on some of the smartest and freshest plays out there in the market today. And to that end, we're speaking with Odyssey Health Incorporated. They're traded on the OTC under the ticker symbol ODYY. They are a medical technology company focused on developing life-saving medical products that offer technological and clinical advantages over current standards of care. Now, the company has assembled quite the sports advisory board. It's headlined by NFL Hall of Famers Kurt Warner and Brett Favre, and even better, two-time Olympic gold medalist Abby Wambach, and that's who we're speaking to today. Abby, thank you so much for making time for us.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Stuart.
Absolutely. So, Abby, I'm not going to do my age for you, but I was lucky enough to be kind of the exception in the 70s. I was playing soccer then. I still play indoor soccer now. But for a lot of American males, there's a couple of things that escape them. One, how wonderful our U.S. women's team is, not only in terms of the Olympic gold medals that you yourself were able to win, along with World Cup championships and some of the great matches against Brazil. You know, you stand as one of the highest all-time scorers of the U.S. national team, but internationally, for both female and male, you stand as one of the leaders with 184 goals. I know I've said a lot there about your career as a soccer player, also known as a footballer, but tell us a little bit about who you are and your background, and then we'll jump into what you're doing with Odyssey Health.
Yeah, I think that I had a unique, long career playing for the women's national team. I played in many Olympics and World Cups, won a bunch of golds, and in my retirement, I've been retired for 6 years, almost 7 years now. I've had a lot of time to kind of reflect on the time that I played, and I played soccer for 30 years. And one of the biggest concerns that I have going into the rest of my life is my brain health and my wellness in my brain. And of course, a lot of us really only think about concussions and CTE as it relates to NFL football. But the reality is brain trauma happens in every sport. And there's just such little research done, not only on concussions themselves and the research of it, but also when you break it down into the genders of women and men. So far, so many less dollars get siphoned over into the women's side, not only because it's newer in terms of like the hundreds of year history of sport, but because women historically haven't been given the same amount of research dollars to figure out what's going on with their bodies and why. And I think that that's why I partnered with Jake and the Odyssey crew, because it's so important, not only to the rest of my life and the way that I will be able to live the rest of my life, but to make sure that our kids are playing sport in the most safe and healthy way. And so I think it's really important to talk about this issue and also, be in the proactive aisle and lane to be able to maybe somehow solve this big issue of head trauma and concussions in sport.
Yeah, listeners, let's do a little review here. And to do that, you can go to investorbrandnetwork.com, click on the clients tab, and they're in alphabetical order. You will see Odyssey Health Incorporated. You can go to their website as well, and that is odysseygi.com. And Purdue recently did, and by recently, just last year, and there's another one at nature.com, and that's the Nature Journal. These are some pretty startling numbers, with up to 22% of soccer injuries being concussions that can result from players using their heads, which is headers, but there's also a lot of whiplash. CTE in soccer is the topic that's being addressed today, but all women's sports were looked at very closely in this Nature Journal article from August 2021. Here's the headline: Why sports concussions are worse for women. The byline is: scientists are racing to understand how the female brain responds to head injury. Bottom line, a growing body of data suggests that female athletes are at significantly greater risk, and that actually turns out to be 2-to-1 of traumatic brain injuries events than male athletes. And a review of 25 studies, that's 25 different studies, suggest that concussions in females, they're not only more susceptible, but they also take longer to recover from, and they are more severe concussions. And Odyssey has the approach here when you look at what they're working with, listeners, and that's on the Investor Brand Network page. On the pharmaceutical side, there's PRV-002. It's a novel compound for the treatment of concussions. Right now, the FDA has no approved drug for that. And PRV-002 is currently being evaluated in a phase 1 clinical trial for the treatment of concussions, with phase 2 trials planned for launch later this year in the fall of 2022. And Abby, you hit the nail on the head. The dollars aren't being spent in the way they should be, which is equitably between men and women. And I'll point out that recently you and your contemporaries, Megan Rapinoe, really had worked hard for equality in pay, which you were able to achieve. And now we really need to get that spotlight and that research and that science on that same level as well. So with your role on the Sports Advisory Board, how will you use that powerful voice of yours?
Well, I think that one of the things you just said is so important. Though our women's national team has equal pay, it goes farther than that, right? It's not just about how much the women are getting paid. It's how these women are getting treated off the field with travel arrangements, etc. That has actually nothing to do with research in the medical fields on women's bodies for things like concussions, for things like CTE. That's why my role on this board is, I think, so important, because I'm always saying, how are we going to get this out to more women? How are we going to get this drug approved? Because the way I look at why I actually wanted to partner with these folks at Odyssey is because I see it as in a three-pronged way. The first and foremost thing that we need to figure out is how to treat and prevent concussions from the get-go, right? And a really important way to figure out how to do that is research, is getting the science and getting the data as much as we possibly can so that we can affect some of those preventative measures and the treatment measures. There is no known treatment for concussions ever. It's only rest. That is the only thing that I was ever told as a player. When I got a concussion, it was rest. And then I had to take the impact test and I had to get back to baseline to be able to be then let back into the playing field. So, and the last prong I just need to say is, like, we have to have an actionable avenue in how we utilize the research that gets shown, right? Because we can get all the data that we want. We can even make the drug and say this thing has proven to be successful, FDA approved. We will get there. That's not only the hope, but my belief is we will get there at some point. But at the end of the day, how do we then make sure that women's bodies and men's bodies, but women's bodies, especially because we're more susceptible to concussions, we're more susceptible to long-term negative health effects because of those concussions, how do we make sure that we can take as good a care as our community, not just the sports community, because we're talking about the military community as well, talking about older folks taking a fall, any person who is dealing with any kind of head trauma will greatly benefit from research, from the production of treatments like this medicine that Odyssey is behind. And then, of course, how do you then make it palatable for the popular culture to make them understand that here we now have a treatment for head trauma, for concussions, for CTE? Because I've watched all the news. I've seen some of these NFL guys, really suffer and suffer in deadly ways, right? For both themselves and other people. And I think that we have to really think of this as a true epidemic in a way, right? I'm very concerned about my 60s. I'm concerned because I made my career on heading the soccer ball. And though I didn't get concussed every time, I was probably intaking, there was head trauma there. Every time my head impacted the ball, and quite frankly, as I got older in the game, the other players around me got stronger and faster. So balls were getting whipped in harder. It's not, the problem is not going to just go away. We have to figure out how to solve this. And in my way, it's kind of this three-pronged effort.
Yeah, and you put out a lot of great points there to unpack, and we are talking about concussions in sports, but you're right, the military community suffers at this at even a higher rate, and I'm sure if we dig deep into the elderly and how easy it is for them to be concussed with falls, those numbers will be staggering as well. And I hate to put this under the guidance and auspice of, well, we're talking about a public company, so we are talking about really a massive market opportunity as well for potential shareholders, investors. But this is not about making a dollar. This is about making a life better, especially as you pointed out, in the latter years of that life. You gave your all to our country, and it's time that our country then, as you put it, not only just pushes forward with these drugs, but also that the popular culture understands the importance of it, because we continue to have a lot of sports, whether it's rugby or boxing or wrestling, or even, think about it, car racing, the amount of whiplash and concussions that happen there. And you mentioned the team there at Odyssey, and you mentioned Jake, and that's Dr. Jacob Van Landingham. And I want you to read about him. Again, Investor Brand Network, scroll down, read about the management team. Michael Redman is the president, CEO, and chairman of Odyssey. Look at his years, 30 years, 3 decades, commercial experience in medical device companies. And then Van Landingham, Jake, he's been, the PhD in neuroscience is just where it begins. He has been in the forefront of really worried about not only our nutrition, but really our brains. And so it's a strong team over there they've assembled, and it's not a surprise that they were able to get people like yourself, Kurt Warner, and Brett Favre. And you do talk about some of the shocking collateral damage, and I'll bring up growing up in San Diego, what it felt like to understand when we finally understood what happened to Junior Seau, and how he took his own life, and what he was battling against just from CTE, and really the devastating effects of it. It's not, dementia is a cruel thief that takes away the quality of your life, but it's more than that as well. It's really a big area that needs to be addressed quickly. I'm sorry, Abby, you were going to say?
Yeah, I think what we're talking about with Junior Seau is obviously worst case scenario, but that's still a scenario. And there are so many different scenarios that go from that worst case scenario to just somebody who has headaches, right? Somebody who's dealing with headaches for long periods of time that maybe they don't need to. So the idea with this novel drug, right, to me, in my mind, I want every single trainer on every single athletic field, or every single medic, or every single older person's home. I want every single one of these people to have access to get this drug inside of their brain. Essentially what this thing is, and this is layman's terms, I am not a PhD by any means, but essentially it is an anti-inflammatory for your brain, right? So within 5 minutes of impact, if you can decrease swelling of your brain in a matter of minutes, your likeliness not only to prevent the concussion from escalating to a concussion state, but truly like the return to play, to the return to normal operating standards of your brain. We only have one brain, and our brain functions and controls so much of our body and so much of our lives. We on a day-to-day basis take it for granted, right? And I think that we have to understand how important this is. And to me, I'm not going to stop until every single trainer, every single medic, every person who incurs a head traumatic event has access to an actual treatment. Because right now, rest is not doing it. Rest is not enough.
Well, we're speaking with Abby Wambach, and when she says she's not going to stop, I want you to go ahead and Google her, because you've been just as prolific in your retirement as you were on the pitch. You are a terrific author. You've got your show that I was just checking out with Matthew McConaughey here in Austin, which I'm just outside of Austin, so I'm excited to watch that. Abby's Places, they're on ESPN Plus. Go check it out. Abby, I know when you say you're going to do something, and I'd be remiss without pointing this out. What a time for the U.S. women's team when you get you and Megan, and I'm speaking of Megan Rapinoe. You guys weren't quiet. You didn't go quietly. You made sure you were listened to. You took your spotlight and you did something with it, and you were driven with a skill set to play soccer. But once your time came, you did not go quietly. You let the world know, hey, this needs to be done for women, and you're doing it again, and we're shining the spotlight. So I truly, as a father of 2 daughters, truly appreciate you, what you're doing, and all of your peers on the U.S. women's national team. Please don't go quietly. Keep speaking as loudly as you are, because we're listening. We really are, and I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time today too. And I just can't emphasize enough how important it is for, people who've gone through a 30-year career playing a sport. I had a phenomenal time. I'm so incredibly proud of representing this country, and I will keep fighting. I will keep doing everything I can to ensure that not just me, because, I think the damage has probably been done for me. This drug is not going to help me at this stage. What I can do is try to do what I can now to make sure that anybody who went through my process, who played soccer or is attempting to play any physical sport, because all sports you're susceptible to getting any kind of head injury. It's my job to make sure I'm fighting for those who come behind me. And, I'm privileged to be in the position that I am, to be on advisory boards with, Brett Favre's and Kurt Warner's and, Jake, and what he has been able to do from a scientific perspective to create this drug, because he himself had a massive head injury that really kind of kicked off his mission and passion to solve this big problem that the world really needs.
Yeah, it sure does. And listeners, learn more about Odyssey Health Incorporated. Just know that ticker symbol, ODYY. We're speaking with U.S. Soccer Hall of Famer Abby Wambach. Abby, again, thanks so much for your time today. Good luck in everything that you do. And thanks so much for what you've done for U.S. women's soccer and what you're doing now for all those on the playing field, off the playing field. It's time now to use that voice of yours, that powerful voice of yours, as you just said, in an altruistic way. It may not be able to help you, but it's going to help others. And we just so appreciate that spirit of yours. Thanks, Abby.
Thanks for having me, Stuart.
All right, for Abby Wambach, this is Stuart Smith saying thanks so much for listening.
The following Stock2Me podcast was an Investor Brand Network audio production. IBN is a financial news and publishing company delivering a new generation of corporate communication solutions, including news aggregation and syndication, social communication, and enhanced news release services. Investor Brand Network may receive payments for corporate communications relations, as well as various press releases and social media solutions provided to its clients. IBN holds no shares of any company named on the IBN sites, brands, and/or podcasts. To be clear, all officers, directors, and independent contractors of Investor Brand Network hold 0 positions in and do not trade or intend to trade the securities for their own accounts. This interview is not an offer or recommendation to buy or sell securities. Information in this broadcast is presented solely for informative purposes and is not intended to be or should it be construed as investment advice. As in all investments, investment in the featured company carries an investment risk. Listeners should review the company thoroughly with the registered investment advisor or registered stockbroker. This podcast audio interview by Investor Brand Network is not intended to be a complete study of the featured company or other companies mentioned. Information used and statements of fact have been obtained from featured company and other sources, but not verified nor guaranteed by Investor Brand Network as to completeness and accuracy. Such information is subject to change without notice. Please see our full disclaimers and disclosures at investorbrandnetwork.com.